Well, welcome listeners to Masters of, the podcast from Cludo, where we talk to people about content management, user experience, and where the web is going. I'm here today with Mike Brodeur from Rogers Corporation. Super excited to talk to Mike. We were having a little conversation off mic just now, and I know he's got a lot of good opinions, a lot of great stuff to say. Mike, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And maybe for starters, maybe a quick introduction of yourself and a little bit of your history. I know it's super fascinating. So why don't you share a little bit about yourself first?
Sure. So I work for Rogers Corporation currently. I've been there for 18 years. It's been a while, but it's been a fantastic journey. I really love the company that I work for, which is great. Before that, I actually worked for a Living History Museum. I worked for Old Sturbridge Village in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, which is a full functioning town from 1832. We like to joke that when you had a stressful day there, you got to go out and play with the sheep. So it was just a great time. It was a great experience. And then before that, I went to the University of Connecticut, go Huskies. I did that and I graduated in 1995. So that's kind of my journey backwards. But I've been with Rogers now for almost 18 years.
Yeah. And it just in a little bit of research, it looks like you've had kind of some twists and turns within Rogers. Is that right? Or what's been your path within the company?
I actually started off working in the marketing department. They needed a web developer, so they went out and they hired me. And I worked with the marketing department for a number of years before getting moved over into the IT department. We've been through a whole lot of ups and downs. It's a company that was founded in 1832. So we have a wonderful story. We've gone through acquiring different companies and that type of thing. So it's just, there's just so much to do. I like to think of it as a really small, big company. I mean, we have facilities in Asia, China, Japan, and then over in Europe and the United States, and we're opening a new facility in Mexico. So we're really a global company, but it doesn't feel like this gigantic, enormous company, which is something that I prefer.
Super interesting. Why do you think that is? Because there's so many cases where that's not the case, where things are more siloed or feels more empty in a way, or like, why do you think that is culturally?
You know, we started as a paper company, back in 1832, and then we've kind of moved up into these different areas. So moving into foams, which was, that's really based out of Connecticut as well. But then we did an acquisition of the Rollings and the ceramic businesses, and those are both in Europe. And then also part of, actually, I'm not even sure what the name of it was at the time, but for us right now, it's called our ACS Advanced Connectivity Solutions area over here in Arizona. So kind of through the acquisitions, we've expanded out globally, but yet it hasn't been this massive expansion, which is nice.
So you touched on it a little bit, but Rogers it takes about 2 seconds to look at your website and see that you've got a ton of products, a ton of locations, investor relations, research, insights, all sorts of things happening on the site. It seems like a lot to take in a way, but also there's just a lot there. You're in a lot of businesses. So how do you define, or how do you think about Rogers as a corporation and how the website fits into its mission, so to speak? Like, obviously it's a key part of it, but how do you think about those two things, the mission and how the website fits in?
So we do a lot of different things, the connectivity stuff with the circuit materials and that type of thing. And then the ceramic and the bus bars, a lot of that kind of stuff into electric vehicles and renewable energy. And then the foams business was everything from open celled foams like Poron all the way to the silicone foams. It's this wide breadth of all these different areas that we play in. And what we do, we don't sell stuff off the shelf. So it's not like you would just go into a store and buy, say, our RO 4000 material. You don't do that. It's designed into all of these different applications that they go in. And some of those design times, they're long. It's not like you go through it and it's done in a couple of weeks and you're all finished. Some of these can be upwards of a year as you go through the process of making sure the material is going to do what you think it's going to do. So our website is absolutely critical to what we do. I mean, we have tons and tons and tons of documentation that's out there. We have engineers that are going out and they want to see all the data specs. They want to see, how does the material come? What are the different options? How can it be used? I mean, there's so much information. To try and get across what Rogers does as a whole on a single site, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have, because it's hard to explain in just a couple of sentences.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm assuming through those acquisitions that you mentioned, through just innovation and change in the spaces that you're in, I'm sure there's a lot of things that are constantly evolving and changing. Are there things that you'd point to that you've kind of learned over time in terms of how to manage all that, how to present that to the web visitors, how to present that to different audiences? Like any kind of key learnings that you've had over time?
Make it easy to find. I mean, in all reality, that's the kind of the shortest thing.
Yeah.
It used to be very much like count the clicks. Okay, if you get to the website, you have to find exactly what you want in X number of clicks, or else you're not doing a really good job. I subscribe to something a little bit differently, in that I think of it as long as the user is feels like they're making their way towards the information that they want and they eventually get it, then that's going to be a successful thing. That's just one of the biggest things that we've learned, is when people want the documentation, they don't want to look for it. They want to find it. They want it right there. They not only want to see the data sheets, maybe a brochure or something like that, but they also want to see the MSDSs, the PSISs, all of the different certifications from where is this material going to be made. So there's a wide breadth of what they're looking for. And trying to bring that all together to where they can find it easily, that can be challenging at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, there's been some debunking, I guess, if you want to call it that, of the 3 clicks is the magic number kind of thing. It sounds like that's evolved maybe a bit for you, or even like you didn't subscribe to that even at any point. I'm not sure, but so what is, as you think about kind of how the governance of the site comes together, is there a way that you set up either the team of folks that you're working with, or the structure of kind of the tech that you're working with? Anything that has helped that kind of findability for you?
As far as how we manage it, the biggest thing that we use really is a single point of contact kind of method.
Okay.
So we have a lot of different product line managers. We have a lot of different marketing people from the different areas. We have the different marketing areas in the different regions. One of the challenges we had was, how do we keep track of what goes up on the website? What's the most accurate? What's the most up to date? And we do that by having a single point of contact. And so for AES, we will have one person where everything kind of flows through that, where they see the bigger picture from that side and we can see the bigger picture from this side. Mm-hmm. But at least when it goes through that contact, I know that it's something that's been approved, that it's something we can go ahead and put out there, because we don't want to put a data sheet out there. That's one example, with data that's not correct. Right. Or there may be an updated version because we've gone through more testing on some of the materials. So we have a single point of contact for each of kind of the 3 big business units that we have.
Gotcha. In that single point of contact, there's probably some rules of engagement, so to speak, or some guidelines in terms of what comes to you and your team, or governance in terms of styling or something like that. Is that true?
Yeah, it's also really important to make sure that things like trademarks are used correctly. That's a big thing for us, especially with like our Poron group. We don't want that to become genericized. So we need to make sure that our trademarks are done correctly. Are we using the same tone of voice in all of our communications? You're right. Does it meet the design qualifications? Are they using the right colors? There's all of these different little things that kind of go into the information that we get. And we need to make sure that when we get it, it's already been approved and looked at. Now I give it another set of eyes, so I'm kind of familiar with the trademarks and all of the design characteristics that we use. So I have one more set of eyes to put out there, but we really want that to be approved before it ever reaches us.
Yeah, makes sense. And I would assume there's, in some cases, maybe in lots of cases, there's a investor relations type lens to make sure you're not divulging trade secrets or whatever the case may be on that level.
And for that, we really utilize our personas. So when we did our website design a few years ago, we went through and we did almost a whole year of studying what are our personas. What are the representation of the main people that use our site? So you're right, when you kind of look through the different lenses, we have a persona that's an engineer. One of our major personas is also investors, because we're a publicly traded company. So we want to make sure that we're talking to at least one of our main personas before it actually ever goes out on the website.
Yeah, super interesting. What was the process of defining those? Who all was involved in that? Like, was it kind of the product, the marketing, the executives? Like, whatever you can share in terms of what that
Sure.
process looked like?
We actually used a third-party company to go out and do a lot of the research, and they talked to a number of our customers. Again, we had to kind of go get permission and that type of thing, but they talked to a lot of our customers. They talked to our product engineers. They talked to anybody who was responsible for putting content on the website, and kind of from all of the different answers and all the different responses, that's how they kind of came up with our set of personas. Now, when they presented them back to us, we also had a chance to kind of talk through it with them. And we actually created another minor set. So we have 3 major personas, but we also have 2 minor personas. And it's areas where we think it's important, but it's not the primary focus of the site, but it's something that we at least wanted to be able to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. With that in mind, like clearly that became the building and refining of the personas, I'm sure is something that became a focal point, and then you went off on that as a kind of project, so to speak. How do you prioritize what to do next? There's obviously tons of different choices in terms of, adding layers to the site, adding different features, functionality to the site, different experiences, and so forth. How do you, along with your peers and your counterparts or your team, how do you set the priorities? I know that's a big question, but like, how do you think about that?
I think step number 1 is listening.
Yeah.
We try and talk to one of the groups that I love to talk to the most is our sales engineers. They're the ones that are out there talking with the teams. They're the ones out there that use some of our online tools for some of the calculations, for product selection, that type of stuff. Some of the best feedback that we get is from the sales engineers. We also do kind of some different conferences as well where I have a chance to talk to the actual customers, and that's great. As far as how do we prioritize that, we're always looking for the low-hanging fruit. What is something that we can do pretty quickly that solves a fairly large issue? Is there anything out there? The second part is really also talking about what are the goals of the different business units or the different product lines, and then how can we reach the goals? One of the things that we're really working with right now is around SEO. So we're doing a lot of work with individually the different product lines to kind of create different blogs and different content around, what is it that we do? How can we help solve your problem? Because, that's the biggest thing for us is what is the right material that's going to help solve your engineering challenge?
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. Speaking of blogs, I think you had one from a few years ago now about the car in the back.
I did.
That caught my eye. I don't know why. There was something about it that caught my eye, but you can tell the story. I think it's kind of fascinating and has some relevance for how we think about data and visibility and so forth.
Yeah, so I love to write. I love writing stuff for the web, and I love writing kind of blog type content. It's a lot of fun for me. So a few years ago, they asked me, would you be willing to write a blog? Can you kind of come up with an idea or something like that? So I just kind of thought about it, and it kind of came back to something that had just happened to me like within the previous week. And I was in a parking lot, and I went to back out of my parking space. I had just gone, I think, to Subway or something. I went to back out of my parking space, and my father always taught me whichever direction the car is going, that's the direction you're going to look. So I turned around and looked. But out of habit, in my newer car, I actually have a little backup camera. So out of habit, I just kind of sneak a peek at that camera just to make sure. And what had happened was I had turned to look, and I started to back up, and I took a peek at the camera, and there were 2 kids standing right behind my car that couldn't have been, I don't know how tall they were, but I was looking right over them over the trunk level. And so I immediately slammed on the brakes, and, everything was good. But it just came back to the fact that, there's so much of this newer technology in vehicles. You have the radar assist and the side radar to tell you if somebody's next to you, and the backup cameras and all of this other stuff. But sometimes you have to kind of combine the old with the new. Don't stare at the backup camera when you're backing up. Turn around and look and get the bigger picture of what's going on, but yet still be able to utilize this technology when it's available to you. Just don't rely on it. So
Mhm.
that was just something that stuck with me. And I said, yep, I'm going to go ahead and write about this. And they said, that's absolutely fantastic. And it just turns out that the camera uses some of the materials from Rogers, so it was able to tie everything all together.
Yes.
Quite nice. The marketing team got hold of that piece, but it was a great experience, and it was something that I just wanted to share with other people, of combining the old and the new.
Right. And so there's something in there about adapting as well, like not
Yeah.
being stuck in your ways, even though they are, they're what you're
Right.
confident in. What we're all confident in are the things that we've been successful with in the past. So super, super interesting.
Yeah.
I thought, and just a great story and a great way of thinking about adapting and changing,
Yeah.
not completely shutting away the past, but also building on it. With that kind of in mind, what's on your mind going forward? Like, how do you think about, obviously, Cludo, we think about generative AI a lot within our product and within the offering that we have. A lot of people are thinking about that from a data governance standpoint, a marketing standpoint, sales. Just about every function is being touched or impacted in some way by at least thinking about where this could take us next and how does it fit together. How do you think about it? Is it an accelerator for you? Do you think about it in terms of like making everyone, including yourself, like have superpowers? Like, I don't know. Yeah, I'll let you explain how you think about it. But what do you think about AI and changing technology just in general?
Uh, we'll start with the AI. I tend to be, I'm a technology guy, so I love gadgets and I love all sorts of different stuff. Though I do tend to be a little bit more of the line where I don't need to be first in order to see it. When it comes to AI, I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities. There is just so many use cases for how it can be used, even from my perspective with development and coding and that type of thing. It writes code for you now, or at least gives you ideas about the directions that you can go. I think there's a lot there, but I also want to take it a little bit slow. One of the things we've talked about, because we've looked at things like, can we use AI for some sort of interactive questions about our materials, or things like that? The issue that we kind of come back to is that sometimes there's just more variables that need to be handled than can be part of something like that. And when you're doing it for a design, you need to make sure that you're correct. You're exactly correct, that the right calculations that we use, that the right environmental variables were taken into account, all this different stuff. So I am excited about AI, though I'm a little bit laid back a little bit right now. I kind of want to see where it goes and see how it improves, and also see how do we govern its usage. Something we've talked about it as a company, and I know that that's something they're working through right now, is how do we use it or utilize it, but do it safely, without kind of giving away too much, because it does require something to learn from, and it needs to learn in order to provide them more information. So where is kind of that fine line of what do we give it versus what are we giving away, and that type of thing. So I think it's going to be something eventually that is going to just be super helpful in just so many different areas. But I'm a little bit more like, okay, let's lay back a little bit and kind of see how it evolves and see how we can implement it in the best way possible.
Yeah, yeah. I think that sounds very practical, and it seems like the pace of change regarding all of that stuff, especially on the generative side, where it is like all of a sudden you can make a video or a song or a paragraph or a press release, whatever that is, it seems to be accelerating in the things that we could look at 3 months ago, 6 months ago are worse than they are now. So there is a progression that's happening that, yeah, I think no one knows how far it will actually go in terms of being human-like or up to the quality standards that you and I would have. But it is, I think, perfectly reasonable to say, let's see where it goes and then start to adopt more and more of it. That makes sense.
And it's a lot, I look at it a lot like UX too. I mean,
Yeah.
you can design with the best layouts that you can come up with. You can design it using best practices and all this other stuff, but there's really no better way to find out whether it works than put it in front of people and do a test and do a usability test to find out, okay, in my mind, they should be able to see this. They don't see this. Now you have to ask yourself why. And I think AI is kind of a little bit like that, where there is some really good stuff that it can do, but you do also need to step back and have that human factor to make sure that while something may be technically readable or grammatically correct, does it make sense and is it understandable to a human?
Totally. That actually brings me to another thing that I wanted to hear your perspective on, and it is around, like, clearly UX, especially for websites, has evolved quite a bit. Like menus look different, navigation looks different, personalization on sites has changed and will continue to be a part of, a choice pattern that we may give people. How do you think about experimenting? How do you actually understand what's working? Are there metrics that you are constantly obsessing over, or is there a framework that you've found to be effective with, like change, have a hypothesis, see what happens, then go from there? Like, what's your approach to that?
I think every situation is a little bit different. One of the biggest things that we look at right now is form completion rate, that type of stuff. The biggest question that I always have is, if somebody makes it all the way to the form and they don't complete the form, why did they not complete the form? What was the challenge that they had? It's always a balance between how much do I give when I submit a form versus how much do I get back? It's that give and take. And is there a balance? So if you're saying, hey, you can download this PDF that talks about X, but we're going to ask for basically your entire life history, then there's not that balance. So you tend to not have that figured out. In the past, we've actually utilized a piece of software where we can watch people use the screen. And we really focused on the forms around, okay, and it's interesting too, because they blur out like what's actually being written in there, which is fine with me. I just really need to see kind of where they're getting stuck. And it's how many people actually start the form, how many people actually get halfway through the form and then stop. What's that perception of how big is a form and how small can it be to get the information that we need, but also to be able to serve the customer. Yeah. And so that's something that we look at really hard, because we want to make sure that if you go through the process of that funnel down to where somebody can ask a question, whether it's a technical services question, customer service, sales, whatever it's going to be, do we make it easy enough to ask the question? And generating those type of leads are absolutely critical to what we do. So we can look at menus and we can look at all these other things. And yes, we have experimented a little bit in some places. We haven't done as much A/B testing as we'd like, but we do tend to put new designs in front of users and do usability tests with them to make sure that they're kind of interacting with a UI in the way that we intended it. Yeah. Sometimes that works, and sometimes they will completely surprise you. How in the world did you do that? But it's something that we can learn from. So there's that balance between the testing and also kind of what we're doing, which is much more hyper focused on the lead generation, form completion, that balance between a give and take between what a customer is looking for and then what we're going to provide back to them.
I guess from that usability standpoint, is that changed over time? Have you noticed that like web visitors in your time just behave differently? Like they have less patience, they click faster. I don't know what it would be, but like any observations around like human behavior change?
I think there's certain things that have happened and they actually have terms for them now, which is stuff that you need to take into account when you're doing the designs. One of them is banner blindness. You remember way back when the internet first started, the big thing was putting a big banner and that was your ad. Yeah. And then pretty soon users, they toned out anything there. So if you actually put something up there that was important and made it look like a banner, it was going to get ignored. Even though it wasn't an ad, they got used to don't look in this space. It was the same thing with right-hand side ads. The same thing. You ended up with that banner blindness. So some of the design choices you have to make are, does this look like an ad, or is this look like an information that's organically part of the page? And I think you see that a lot now with advertising. Is it, how can we get it in there so that it looks like it's an organic part of the page, specifically around that it's going to be read? Right. I mean, our internet right now is just so ad driven. Everything is around advertising and advertising and advertising. And you find a lot of people that are trying to use more and more tools to kind of avoid that. But those are the type of things that you need to take into consideration when you're designing something that's actually legitimate. Don't put it over here where they typically find an ad. Don't design that graphic that looks like something that is going to take you off to another site that wants you to buy something. You have to make those design decisions on a daily basis to make sure that the content that you put out there looks like it's the correct content, organically part of the page.
Right. And it's almost like the pattern interruption that serves the visitor the best, as opposed to making it look just like something that's going to have advertising or going to have kind of false signals in a way of taking you in a different direction. having it a way that you can signal that this is all you.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
in a way, it's kind of similar to what we're seeing with AI, right? There's this big push for, at some point we have to label what's being generated by AI versus what's generated by a human being. Who knows where that will go exactly, but it's similar in that way. I wonder if, someday maybe we have a way to have AI blindness or generative AI blindness, and that has an interaction point where people can skip over the things and really want the human being interaction, or perhaps the other direction, it's good enough and I'm going to go to the answer that's generated by AI that is, I trust, right? So it's interesting.
I think there's going to be a balance there, and you see that even now in search results. There's times when you'll put in a search and you can see that the AI kind of generating what it is. I think, at least for me, I look at that as a starting point, but I also want to get confirmation somewhere else that this is actually going to be true. I think over a period of time, as it gets more and more accurate, maybe that'll happen less and less. But I think at this point, you still almost want that second confirmation of, okay, this was generated from something that it was learned, but let me just go somewhere else, because I think we've all heard the challenges of AI giving you something that's just totally out there because it didn't understand the concept of the question. I think we're still at the point where we also want to get that second confirmation to say, okay, yep, that is right. We're good. We're moving on.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? I feel the need to like timestamp this. So just for everybody listening, this was created in May 2024. If this sounds crazy in the future, that's okay. This is a stamp in time.
We can see which one of us was right. I think that's
I
all.
guess so.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you think about all of these changes? And I guess I know that you've done some speaking and some training and some coaching of other folks. It seems to be something that you're very much aligned with and that you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Where do you go to engage with the community of folks that think the way that you do, are trying to solve some of the same challenges? Like where's your community, and what have you learned about how that community behaves, I guess?
That's really interesting, because the biggest community that I like to be part of really is the UX community, because it's just endlessly fascinating. I mean, you think about this, back when we were starting, we weren't designing for screens this size or this size. It was kind of like everything had to be 800 by 600 because that's your typical screen. And now when you think about it, we have tablets of all sorts of sizes and phones, and then we have these monitors, 28-inch monitors, 4,000 by whatever is the resolution. So I really tend to look towards the UX type of groups or websites, or there's places where I go to because I love to read their blog articles about all sorts of different topics. I am endlessly fascinated with how is this going to continue to evolve. What's going to be the next screen? I mean, we're talking about folding screens now. Is there going to be design characteristics that we need to take into account for the folding screens? Where are they going to fold? Are there going to be roll-up screens? What's the resolution going to be like? Are we going to go with the integrated reality where it's kind of like you can see stuff that's being projected out there? How are we going to design for that? So the UX part, no matter what, it's how do we interact with whatever we design, whether it be AI or whatever. How are we going to interact with the AI? Is it going to be through virtual reality, kind of that space in between, or just regular computer screens? I have no idea where that's going to go, but it's endlessly fascinating to me to how are we going to design for that?
Yeah, it is true. And I think that's part of what the value of community is, and part of the value of people solving discrete problems that you may have not encountered yet, or that maybe you haven't needed to tackle yet, but they've needed to go there before. Who do you look to in terms of, like, I don't know, this is kind of a cliched question maybe, but who's the best out there in terms of UX? Are there products or web experiences that stand out, or what do you think?
So I'm a big fan of the Nielsen Norman Group. I go to their website all the time to read their blogs. I've been to a lot of their trainings. I love to do the in-person thing because I love to, when we have those times when you go around and talk to not only other people and finding out what their challenges are, but the instructors a lot of times will kind of be part of that too. And you can just chat about some of the stuff that we're talking about now. I'm really a big fan of what they do. One of the books was written by Jacob Nielsen, Designing Web Usability. I mean, that was written years and years and years ago, and yet the core concepts of what he's talking about are still clearly acceptable, even kind of brought forward onto these different screens, different monitors, the thought process around how you design or how you test, it's still applicable to this day. I don't mean that to be a plug or anything like that, but that's where I
Okay.
really like to go
Yeah.
to read up on kind of what the latest trends are.
Yeah. Part of what's interesting is you go back to like just the display of information as a core thing, web or digital or not. And it is, I think, fascinating to think about how some of the core principles still hold true. So I find myself every once in a while, I open up the old Edward Tufte books. I'm not sure if you're familiar with
Yep.
his visual display of information.
Yep.
It reflects on images and graphics and designs that were done hundreds and hundreds of years ago that are still very information dense and rich and very
Yep.
consumable. So I think there is something about how human beings take in information that there are some universal characteristics to it. So I think relying or like building on the classics, I think is super important and is part of the game, I guess.
Yeah, and you take that into the digital realm, and you think of we think of it as a giant F. So as people are reading through a page, if you eye track them, you can actually see in the beginning they read all the way across, and as you move down, you read less and less and less across. And that's, you really need to break things down and chunk it in such a way that it can be interpreted very quickly. You know, the proper use of headings, the proper use of bullets, and that type of stuff. That's something that I really trying to do with kind of our marketing teams all around the world. Is we do trainings on that. How do we write for the web? How do you think about what you're trying to communicate? It's no longer just about how much information can you get on the page and make it so dense. You know, it's, you got to scroll and scroll and scroll. It's about how can you make it concise and easily understandable. And for somebody who's trying to scan through, to help them find that point, oh, that's what I'm looking for right there. You know, that's kind of the challenge that we have. And so as we train the other marketers that we have to kind of think about it in that way, the stuff that we get from them just becomes much more refined.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
awesome.
I do have one kind of final-ish question. Might lead to more questions because I can't
Sure.
help it. Who else should we have on this show? Again, we're trying to bring on people that are masters of managing content and thinking through user experience and how that intersection of user behaviors and content will unfold in the future. Anybody else come to mind? Whether it's a website, whether it's a, I don't know, pick whoever, and we'll try and get them.
Oh, wow. I really wish I had some time to think about that. Coming up with something right off the top of my head. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one. It's something that I really want to give some thought to.
That's fine. Totally fine. I know also we talked briefly that you're a musician. Anything that
I
you've
am.
learned from like being a musician and I don't know, put it corny, like orchestrating content for your website visitors, like is there a tie in there that you've seen?
It's funny because I think like when I'm performing on stage, you're really not only just playing the music, but you're also kind of paying attention to how the audience interacts with what you're doing. And I think that's a lot of what we try to do on the website. If we do like a series of blogs on a very specific topic and all of a sudden we see we get a lot of traffic to that, then it's an indication, oh, this is something that people are looking for. As an example, from a musical point of view, my band, we're a cover band. We've been together for 12 or 13 years now. But the lead singer actually does a lot of solo work in the Irish realm. So every show we will pull out, we call it a triple shot, 3 Irish songs, and we'll play them. And there are times when the people just go nuts. And then we'll pull out some more and we'll just have a lot of fun with it. And there's other times when you play the first song and it is just crickets. I mean, there's just like, they could care less. They're like, I don't know that song, play some Johnny Cash, you know, kind of stuff like that. It's really similar to when we think about content. It's the same way. If we're putting stuff out there that people are interested in, that they're looking at, that they're viewing, that they come back to, or even that they comment on or ask questions about, that kind of shows us, yes, that's kind of an area where we need to be. I think for a while we were really stuck on incredibly highly technical blogs because a lot of what we do is very highly technical. And then you write a blog like the one that I did, or a blog just around a much more simple application, and all of a sudden those blogs get 3 or 4 times the hits. And true, the audience is a little bit bigger than maybe technical engineers, but you can kind of see where there's a difference there of, you know, people are relating to what we're talking about here. So it's not only just about, hey, here's our material, it's the best ever, this is why it's so great, these are the features. And it took us forever to get our marketing team to differentiate between features and benefits. Features is what we want to tell you. Benefits is how it's going to help you. And they're two totally different things. So yes, what we see in the music and kind of listening and interacting is no different than what we're doing when we're trying to do content for the website.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. I got to let you give a plug. You want to give a plug to the band? Yeah, I'm assuming you guys play.
Oh, yes. Since I moved to Arizona, we've only played a couple times a year. I go back east, but the band's name is Triple Shot. Stan and Mark and Brian and I, we're known as a band that has an awful lot of fun together. If you come see one of our shows, you're going to have a good time. The challenge is go ahead and request anything you want to request, because we're going to try it. And there's times it has come out great, and there are times when we have crashed and burned. But you know, it's just really all about just having some fun, making music, and again, just interacting with people.
Great, great. Well, I love that, and I will. I'll look for the next show. I would love. That sounds right up my alley. It sounds like a ton of fun, and I can only imagine a few requests that I would put in. Well, Mike, thanks so much for taking the time and having a chat with us. I know I threw maybe a couple curveballs at you, so we'll follow up with some of those. Any parting words for the audience?
No, Nick, I really appreciate you having me on. It's always good to talk to you. Always good to talk to you.
Super fun conversation. So I appreciate you taking the time. Again, we'll put this out into the world, and check us out on the next Masters of. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Thanks so much.